some of you in this room will recall a coffee and conversation that we had a year ago in April 2016. It was presented by Dr. Brian DeToy, and it was entitled The U.S. and Cuba, a Complicated Relationship. So I listened intently to that because I'd been stationed in Guantanamo 55 years ago in 1961, 1962. And so then I found out that Brian conducts tours of Cuba, and I thought, wow, this is for me. I got to go. And my daughter Cindy, who's with us here today, shared my enthusiasm. So we signed up for a 10-day tour of Cuba this March and came back in April. And so Ed's got the first slide. We departed Miami, and we landed at Holguin. Holguin, Cuba is the fourth largest city in Cuba. You can see the airport's named after Frank Pais. Frank Pais was one of Castro's young revolutionaries. He was 22 years old in 1957, and he did things like organize pockets of resistance in urban areas. He raised funds for the revolution, and he recruited for Castro. He said, hey, Fidel's up here in the mountains campaigning. He really needs your help. And what he did was extremely dangerous because these local police departments were they were goon squad for Batista, and they were worse than the army. They just weren't nice at all. They were like the Nazi Gestapo. So sure enough, they caught Frank Pais on the streets of Santiago one day and shot him dead. Well, that got the Holguin Airport named after him. The next.
Where is that down in Cuba?
Holguin, right? Yeah, I meant to point that out. Yeah, right here. So we landed here in Holguin, and our ultimate destination for day one was Santiago de Cuba, and so our route takes us through Bayamo, which I think is the next slide. Oh, okay, there's our tour bus, and the reason I put that on there, these things are thick in Cuba. They're every place, and the logo, the manufacturer right here is Yutong. They're made in China. So these buses are modern, they're quiet, they're comfortable, and they have good air conditioning, which you need in Cuba. Okay, next. Okay, now we're receiving our first history lesson from Brian. This is this park and the statue paid tribute to Carlos Manuel Cespedes, and he was called the father of the nation. And keep in mind that the Spanish had been in Cuba for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they weren't one bit nice to the local people. I mean, they were terrible. They bled all the wealth from the sugar industry out of Cuba. They brought in slaves from Africa to do the work, and the poor people, the individuals, just had a tough time finding food and clothes and things like that. So it was Spain was really unpopular with the locals, and they were hated. So Cespedes started it was the first the first serious effort to get Spain out of Cuba. There were actually 2 wars back to back, but Cespedes' time period was like right after our Civil War, 1868, and he was a plantation owner. I wouldn't say he's a rich plantation owner because if he made very much money from the sugar operation, the Spanish just took it away. So he gathered all these slaves together, and he said, okay, I'm cutting you loose. You're free. And then he said, now we're brothers. Let's go get Spain and run them out of Cuba. And so they started this 10-year war, as it was called, and it was a bloody thing. And most of these former slaves all they had to fight with was a bayonet or a machete, the same thing they harvested the sugar cane with. And so if you got a machete and you're going up against opponents with rifles, you got to use guerrilla tactics. So these people were called Mombies, and the Mombies would hide in the bushes along a trail, and a Spanish column would come down this trail, maybe a few on horseback, others on foot, and the Mombies would dive out of the bushes and take down their opponents. And this is kind of how they got their arms. It's that way too. If you're a Mombie person and you kill your opponent that has a rifle, and now you've promoted yourself from a machete man to rifleman. And they would do things like sneak into the Spanish camps at night and take out the sentry. If there was arms stacked there, they grabbed those. And so this war went on for 10 years. Eventually it kind of died down. The Spanish captured Cespedes' son, Oscar, killed him. Eventually they got Carlos too. The Cuban people really had their heart in this, but it didn't work that well because they lacked the clout. They didn't have the stuff to carry out this war, to get Spain out of there. To oust Spain would take a great big army, modern weapons, and a navy that would help too. And that didn't happen until 20 years later when Big Brother from the north got involved. Okay, next. Okay, here we are arriving at Santiago de Cuba. I'm pleasantly surprised that the hotel accommodations there were as good as they are. I mean, it makes sense that they are because the Europeans and Canadians that have been touring Cuba for years, and they've poured a lot of money into that country. But they have excellent accommodations, just top-of-the-line hotels to stay in, and that was great. I was expecting some 1950s thing that needed TLC. I mean, it was nice to have just a real good place to stay. And so we were at this hotel for 2 nights down in Santiago. Okay, next. Okay, here's something we did a lot. We ate really, we ate really good food, and the food there is excellent. I mean, we had steak, seafood, lots of chicken, pork, nice fresh vegetables, and there's 2 types of eating places in Cuba. They have the restaurants, which are pretty much owned by the government, and sometimes they aren't quite as competitive or imaginative as they could be. But they also recently have allowed private individuals to go into the restaurant. Okay, so day 2, we go to Guantanamo. And this was very interesting to me to tour the bay, or to tour the area in the vicinity of Guantanamo Bay, the naval base. You don't go on the base. That place is locked up like the Bastille. There's no getting in there. But excuse me. So you can see the Cubans have erected a lookout there, and it's roughly 3 miles from the northern border of the Navy base. Next. Yeah, so this is the view you get, and this body of water right here extends into Cuba. It's near the town of Caminera, and then it flows down. It kind of narrows into a bottleneck, sort of like an hourglass, and where the narrowest part is the northern boundary of the base, and then it widens out again. This is a great big base. This is 45 square miles, 29,000 acres, and about a third of that's underwater with Guantanamo Bay.
So he's asking, this is the main airfield is on that strip.
Yeah.
Here. There's the naval entryway here. Most of the U.S. housing where everybody lives is on that peninsula as it swings around.
Yeah. This is what Yeah, it was. So what you're looking at here is the northern boundary of the base, and then just like Brian said, the main part of the base, and we called it main side, is over here on the east, and this is where they have all the facilities that take care of the ships that come in, and the mess halls, and the barracks, the hospitals, the admin building, the base exchange, all that stuff. So there's main side over here, and then the southern boundary of the base is the Caribbean, and along the Caribbean over here on this side is the Naval Air Station, which is called Leeward Point. The sailors call it Leeward Point. But next, so here's Leeward Point Naval Air Station. So this is the Caribbean out here. There's one runway, 8,000 feet long, and so this is the squadron that I was in. This is where we lived. There's a lot of Marines over on that side. There isn't too much in the way of facilities like there is on the main side. There's no PX there or anything. We had a big open air theater where you could go every night and see a first run movie, and they had a nice swimming pool there. If you needed a tube of toothpaste or something like that, and you had to go to the base exchange, you had to go down here, get on a ferry boat or wait for a ferry, get on it, and chug, chug, chug across 3 miles of water over the main side. And so it would take you about a half an hour to get across over to the other side. Next.
You didn't take this picture on this trip. This is when you were over there.
Yeah, right. Look, this picture I took on a trip years and years ago. This is from summer of I took this in the summer of 1962, and I think it still pretty much looks the same. Next. This is our flight line, and here's a couple of our squadron P2Vs here. There's 2 more over there. You can see how dry and arid this is. It just never rains, and it's kind of like a desert there. Yeah, we saw great big iguana lizards down on the beach, but I don't think much has changed right now. We don't use these aircraft anymore. The last ones, the 7 model, the P2V7, that they sent to Vietnam. Okay, next. Now we're back up in the lookout again. The Cuban right here is our guide, Hiroshi. Everybody liked Hiroshi. I mean, he was just worth his weight in gold on this trip. He had a reputation. If something needed to be done, he could fix it. Once in a while, there'd be a problem at the airport with luggage or something like that. Well, he'd take care of it. And of course, he was fluent in both languages. He knew our slang words and everything. But I was surprised at how much training and how much schooling they have to go through to be a certified tour guide. And so they, anyway, they're pretty talented people, all of them. And so I respect them for that. It's a position that elevates them up the social ladder a little bit. So they probably make a little more money than some of the Cubans. Okay, let's next.
Bill?
Yes.
Show us something.
Oh yeah, I should have said that earlier too. Thank you. Yeah, we left Santiago here, and it's about a 50-mile drive, 40 miles maybe. It's over some pretty mountainous terrain. You drive along here. It takes quite a while to get here. So here's Guantanamo Bay right here. So yeah, kind of. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, here I'm showing the folks. We're trying to tell them all about the base. They all turn their back to me and dozed off. Just, okay, next. Okay, so you don't see any statues or anything of Fidel. You see lots and lots of billboards like this, and so I put that one up there because we're approaching Santa Fina Cemetery. And so here's Fidel a few years ago. Next. here's what he looks like now. Yeah, so this cemetery, it's a little bit like Arlington Cemetery in Washington. They have an honor guard, and they change the guard every half an hour. Next. So check that goose step. Next. Okay, this is a monument, a memorial to this. Where have I got it? I got to get my memory jog. This is Jose Marti, and he was called the Apostle of Freedom. He's the #1 hero to the Cuban people. They regard him just like we regard George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, and you can just see by this monument how elaborate it is, how much he means to the Cuban people. It really is. There's a statue of him in here, and this great big memorial that's been there for a long time. I mean, here's Fidel, and he's under a rock about as big as this showcase here. And Jose Marti, I mean, that's a good indicator of their relative importance to the Cuban people. So Jose Marti was he was a journalist, a professor, revolutionary leader, yeah. And he was the principal organizer against Cuba's war against Spain, and he was killed in a battle in 1895. So he never lived to see it to end when it led into the Spanish-American War. This building right here, this mausoleum, has a big opening in the floor. You walk over there and you look down, and here's this elaborate mahogany casket or bier, and it's draped with a Cuban flag. It's done in good taste. It looks good. Okay, next. Okay, here we are at Siboney, Playa Siboney. But this is a beach beginning in June 22nd, 1898. 25,000 U.S. troops were moved to Cuba, and then that's a massive operation. It was just huge, and so there was 2 landing areas, Siboney here, and then up around this hill over here on the other side is another landing area called Daiquiri. Daiquiri had wooden piers, and it was a little handier to unload equipment and troops. So I think 16,000 of them landed at Daiquiri over here, and roughly 6,000 or so landed here at Siboney next. So this is just the beach without us in it. So it's a nice looking beach. The thing that surprised me kind of is why the Spanish didn't oppose this landing more. I mean, it seems to me they could have placed some artillery around there, some shooters or something, made it a little rough for them to come ashore, but they didn't. These landings were unopposed. Next. So here's the same exact beach, Siboney, in 1898. And so it's Private Ryan, it ain't. I mean, there's guys standing around. It's kind of a loose, leisurely operation. I was just going to read you the names of a few of the senior commanders at that time in the Spanish-American War. Of course, the #1 general, Major General William Shafter, was in charge of the Army operation. They called him Pecos Bill. He was a great big guy. He was like 300 pounds. And he had gout, so he wasn't as mobile as he could have been, or he didn't get out in the field as much. His second in command was a former Confederate general was a West Point alum, and he was General Joe Wheeler. So General Wheeler was a congressman from Alabama, I think, and he was pretty much the #2 man as far as the Army was concerned. If any of you ever seen the movie Rough Riders, General Wheeler was played by Gary Busey, and he says things like, "Come on, boys, we got them damn Yankee Spaniards on the run," and that's how he talked too. Okay, the Navy, their top commander there was Rear Admiral William Sampson, and his second in command was Commodore Winfield Scott Schley, and we'll talk a little more about that a little later.
Question on the site. Did very many former Confederate officers come back into the Union Army?
Brian could tell you more like that. But
4
yeah, there.
throughout the entire,
Yeah.
all in this war.
Yeah.
Robert E. Lee's son was the consul of
Oh, yeah.
and a couple more. When the Army went down from 1 million down to 40,000, no room for Confederates in it.
I never thought about any of them coming back. That's really good.
Yeah.
4 of them for this war.
Thank you.
Okay, next. So this is Elkin A. This was a fort that was manned by 600 Spanish soldiers at the time, and it's located 3 miles north of Santiago, or 3 miles north of the San Juan Hill, or San Juan Heights. San Juan Heights is the high ground overlooking Santiago, and it consists of Kettle Hill and San Juan Hill. These two hills were kind of together, and so this was 3 miles away. The Spanish held it, and there was a U.S. Army division there at the time, and it was commanded by Brigadier General Henry Lawton, and General Lawton gets orders from General Shafter's headquarters. Says, take out this fort at Elkin A. He says, there's only 600 Spaniards there. He says, should be a piece of cake. You can probably do it in a couple hours. Then when you get done with that, then you can come on over and reinforce our attack on San Juan Hill. So this was July 1st, 1898. So this entire division was probably 6,000 men. They were about 10 to 1 odds, and they fought and they fought and they fought. And this little fort, Elkin A, kept an entire division pinned down for all day, for 12 hours. And so the result of that was that when they attacked San Juan Hill, they were short 1 division. And so the consequence of that was the battle took longer, and when it takes longer, you get more casualties. So next. So this is Elkin A. Next. Okay, here we're near the top of San Juan Hill, and we're getting another history lesson here. The attack, Brian's kind of pointed out toward the east. The attack was done on the east side of the hill, and it was split into 2 forces. And on the right flank was the Rough Riders, who was let's see if I can, yeah, I'll just read it off of here. So so assault Kettle Hill was General Joe Wheeler and some other prominent leaders, Colonel Leonard Wood, Colonel Theodore Roosevelt. And then joining them was an all-black regiment of Buffalo soldiers, and they made a real difference too. They were fierce fighters. So, and the Buffalo soldiers were commanded by Blackjack Pershing. Of course, that name followed him clear into War I. No, he was still a major player. I mean, he's my favorite guy in the whole, well, almost in the whole San Juan campaign. The left flank was the 1st Infantry Division commanded by Brigadier General Jacob Kent, and their objective was San Juan Hill. The Rough Riders were dismounted cavalry. They didn't have room on the ship to take the horses, so all their horses were back in Tampa, and they left some of the Rough Riders there too, probably to take care of the horses. But one thing we learned from this is what a huge difference these U.S. Gatling guns made in this attack. They just saturated the Spanish defenses with 18,000 rounds of Gatling gun ammunition. They were killing the Spaniards just right and left, and the ones they didn't kill, they kept pinned down where they couldn't defend as well. So. Okay, next. So this is a blockhouse. This is the top of San Juan Hill. Of course, this has been more recently reproduced, but it gives you an idea of just how formidable these defenses were and just what the attackers were up against. The present-day Cubans have done a good job of preserving this as a battlefield. Next. So this is kind of near the top of San Juan Hill. To get there, you go down a sidewalk here and then up a flight of stairs here. You can see in the background over here, there's a Ferris wheel. There's a little zoo over there. That's kind of where Kettle Hill was. Okay, next. Imagine you're standing here, and it's July 1st, 1898. Okay, this green gazebo isn't going to be there. This stone fence or wall isn't going to be there. These apartment buildings won't be there. But in place of this apartment building was a farmhouse, and it had great big vats or kettles out behind it where they processed the sugar cane. So that's how Kettle Hill got its name, from these kettles. So this is pretty much right in this area is where Teddy Roosevelt and the Rough Riders started their attack up the hill. And okay, next. And this yellow thing right here is where they emerged at the top. Next. So this is just a statue of a Cuban revolutionary freedom fighter, and they're honoring him. He has a 45-70 Springfield trapdoor rifle. The excuse me, I gotta get some water. So if we ask anybody in this room, hey, who was your favorite player in this San Juan Hill business? Everybody would say Teddy Roosevelt. Of course, he was our president. He was a Medal of Honor recipient. He did things with the national park and so forth. But there's another guy I want to mention too, because he came from Denver, Colorado. His name was Sergeant Ivy Baldwin. Anybody ever hear of him? Yeah. Yeah, Ivy Baldwin, actually later on after the war, he was the first man in Colorado to fly an airplane. He was the first man in New Mexico to fly an airplane. He's a laureate in the Colorado Aviation Hall of Fame. He was an accomplished balloonist, and he was a former circus performer. And later on, when he retired, he moved to what's the area south of Boulder over here? It's just, yeah, El Dorado Springs. And so he got permission there to string a 650-foot long cable across that El Dorado Canyon. And he used to go out there and walk across this thing all the time. And 4th of July would come up if there were people there. He made 86 walks across El Dorado Canyon. And so, but anyway, he had a reputation for being a proficient balloonist, because he used to have kind of a circus act. Right over Elitch Gardens, he would fly balloons off there, and then he had a trapeze on the balloon, and he would do tricks, and he would parachute out, and all sorts of things. So in 1897, the U.S. Army Signal Corps wanted to add a balloon to their inventory, and there wasn't anybody in the Army that knew anything about balloons, so they they contacted Ivy Baldwin at his home in Denver, and they said, how would you like to be a sergeant in our signal corps? You can have your very own hydrogen balloon, and you're in charge of maintaining it and flying it. He said, okay, I'll do it. So the balloon was being manufactured in France. And so the Army tells the French, okay, our balloon guys in Denver shipped the balloon to Fort Logan, Colorado, which they did. And Ivy Baldwin played with the balloon and just evaluated it and all of this. And the most complicated thing about this balloon is probably the hydrogen generators. I mean, it's great big tanks where they mix the sulfuric acid and the iron filings together, and then there's another device that attaches to it to dry out the gas, and so they gave the balloon approval. It's ready to go, and so then the balloon and Ivy Baldwin got transferred to Kansas. And from there, it wasn't very long. He meets his commanding officer, who was a Major Joe Maxfield, and Major Maxfield was designated to be the balloon observer. The Army wanted an officer aboard the balloon on every flight, and they have a clipboard and a sketch pad and evaluate the battlefield conditions and everything. So they had the balloon pilot and the observer. So then right after that, Major Maxfield and Sergeant Baldwin get transferred to this massive troop movement that's going into Cuba. So they arrive near San Juan Hill, and they only made 3 flights while they were there. The first flight was kind of a shakedown again to test the generators and all of that. And this balloon was tethered. It was on a winch and a cable, and they could reel it out. So they flew the balloon, and the second flight was probably their most productive one. They took the balloon up, and the wind kind of carried it over Santiago Harbor. Major Maxfield has his clipboard and his sketch pad, and he's, okay, there's defenses over here on the northeast side to protect the city. There's 8 Spanish warships in the harbor, and then the balloon kind of drifted over towards San Juan Hill, and he says, well, we could make a frontal attack right up the south side, but the east side looks a little better. So anyway, he's writing all this down. So they got some real good intel out of that second balloon flight. Then the third balloon flight they sent up on the day of the battle, July 1st, 1898, and the balloon envelope looked like a Swiss cheese. It was just shot to pieces with Mauser bullets. Yeah. So the balloon comes out, blam, and Baldwin and Maxfield escaped. They got out of it okay, without a scratch. But they were the first U.S. military personnel to be shot down in battle. So that's Ivy Baldwin. He's one of my heroes of this thing too. Okay, let's next. Oh, okay. Did you skip one, Ed? Go back one. No, maybe not. Okay. No, go ahead. Yeah. Okay. So this is Santiago Bay or Santiago Harbor. It's the city's inland, and there's kind of a long, narrow channel that comes down and goes out into the Caribbean. And so this is sort of what it looked like. Okay, next. This is the El Muro Castle at Santiago. It shares the name El Muro with 2 other forts. The one nearly 500 miles away in Havana is also called El Muro, and there's one in San Juan, Puerto Rico with that same name. El Muro just means it's built on a rocky promontory. The name of the castle was actually El Muro. Let's see, it's San Pedro de la Roca. Well, and this fort took 62 years to build. It was finished in 1700, and it did protect the harbor. Prior to that, pirates could come into Santiago. They did too. Henry Morgan, he'd take over the city for a while, stay as long as they wanted, and then they'd leave. So this fort really changed things. And then after it had been around a while, they had an earthquake, and it got quite a bit of damage then, and they didn't need it as much to protect the harbor, so they made a prison out of it. And then when the Spanish-American War started, they kind of put it back into service as a military fort again. It was a good observation post. They could watch the U.S. Navy out here on and let the folks in Santiago know what was going on there. But okay, next. So right here, on 2 days after the Battle of San Juan Hill, July 3rd, there was a humdinger of a naval battle right here. The Spanish had 8 ships in the harbor, and they couldn't stay there. They were sitting ducks because our troops were closing in on the city, and they would have been captured right there in port. So they had to break out. They had to make a run for it. And so there were 5 cruisers, 2 destroyers, and a gunboat. And one cruiser, the Reina Mercedes, had mechanical problems. It was getting worked. The engines wouldn't run, and so the Spanish admiral says, "Okay, we're going to make a run for it," and they had to be a little bit careful because the U.S. Navy sunk a collier, a coal ship out here to try to block the channel, and it didn't quite do it, but it made it narrower and trickier to get out. So it was 6 Spanish ships came out. The cruiser Reina Mercedes was still in port because the engines wouldn't run, and then so the Spanish admiral tells the captain of the Reina Mercedes, "Okay, you stay in here, help protect the city, defend yourself. We'll leave the gunboat with you too." And so they did that, and so these 6 Spanish ships came out of here, and they were just lined up like ducks in a shooting gallery, and I mean it was a real humdinger of a naval battle. They in just a short period of time they sunk all 6 of them. So the Spanish lost hundreds of. They either were killed or wounded, several hundred, and then there were about 1,100 men in the water. Some of them were so close to shore they could swim to shore. There's photographs of the Cuban revolutionaries standing on the shore, rounding up these survivors of the sea battles and taking them prisoner. The overall commander, I said, was Admiral was Admiral Sampson, but was he there? No, he was a few miles away. He had an appointment. This was on a Sunday morning, and he had an appointment to meet with General Shafter at Stephen A. or Daiquiri, and so Admiral Sampson was gone in his flagship, the USS New York. So it was kind of up to Commodore Schley, but anyway, he won the battle. Next. Okay, just a little scenic overview again of the castle. Next. So this is Moncada Barracks. This is the scene of the first attack staged by Fidel Castro against the forces of Fulgencio Batista, and this happened in July 26, 1953, and so they had this thing all planned perfectly, and they rehearsed it, and they had the element of surprise and everything. It might have worked, but they hit a couple snags, and anyway, the whole attack was a giant. Well, it totally failed. They had a caravan of I think 16 automobiles, and it was down near Elkin, and they had 16 cars lined up, and they had over 100 attackers, 100 revolutionaries that were going to attack this fort. Their objective was to get ammunition, guns, and ammo out of this Moncada barracks. So they drove up near the place, and there was troops outside, and some shooting started before they ever got to the building. They had guns, and they had a lot of their guns in one car, and it got lost. It got the driver was out driving around, and so they weren't armed as well as they could. Some of the other there's a museum inside now, and they show some of the weapons that were used during this attack. It was like stuff you'd find on a farm: 22 rifles, shotguns, small caliber handguns. So anyway, there 61 of Castro's attackers were killed in this battle. And if you go inside in the museum, there's 61 photographs on the wall in there. It's an interesting place to visit in this museum. They captured a lot of the attackers. The number 2 man in charge behind Fidel was Abel Santa Maria, and they captured him and tortured him. I mean, this got brutal. I mean, this got evil. They actually gouged out his eyeballs, and his sister, Haiti Santa Maria, came along on this because her fiance was in on the attack, and so was her brother. So they actually dangled his eyeball in front of her. But they were trying to get him to talk. Who's your leaders? Where's your headquarters? How many of you are there? When and where are you going to hit us again? And all these kind of things. But nobody talked. And so when it was all finished, there were roughly 30 of them left. Some of them ran off. Fidel ran off. His brother Raul ran off, and they captured them later on. But they rounded them all up, and then they had a kind of a drumhead court trial for them. Castro got up in his own defense. He was a lawyer, and he started telling about this Abel Santa Maria thing, and they drug him out of the courtroom. They said he's too ill to attend the trial, so they put him back in his cell, and so they all got pretty stiff prison sentences. All of these attackers, 20 years, 30 years, and but less than 2 years later, they were released. The whole world was watching, and the Cuban people were real concerned, and there was a lot of political pressure, everything. Finally, they said, "Okay, we'll let you out, but you're banned from Cuba." So they said, "Okay, go to Mexico," which they did. They went to Mexico, and they were. So Castro and a few of his revolutionaries started from scratch in Tux Pond, Mexico, 100 miles south of Tampico. If you could carry this map out to Tux Pond, Mexico, it's 2,300 miles over into Mexico. It would be outdoors someplace. So they were in Mexico. They managed to put together a force of 82 revolutionaries in Mexico. Next, this is kind of a wimpy little boat picture. I'll show you a bigger one in a minute. But this is the revolutionary boat Grandma, and the boat Grandma is still on display today. It's a big deal, and it's in a museum in Havana. Yeah, let's go ahead and look at that. So they have this boat. They need to get 82 people back to Cuba from from Mexico. And you know how far it is, 2,300 miles. So they had to sail this revolutionary boat, Grandma. Then their point of intended landing was right here, just on this tip of. It's even marked Grandma Landing. So they had it all planned out to sail that thing 2,300 miles. The boat itself was maybe made for 10, 15 people. They put 82 people on it. Their stock factory fuel tanks on this thing were 1,200 gallons. Well, these engines would suck up 500 gallons a day, and so they only had 2 days of fuel. So they had to take on another. They had to put another 2,000 gallons of fuel on it, in 55-gallon barrels and jerry cans. So they put all this fuel on there. Then so I just calculated the weight of the fuel. That's 22,400 pounds. Then the people they put on, the 82 people would have weighed about 13,000 pounds. So it made it really sit low in the water, and it didn't have any speed. So it took them a week to go from Mexico to Cuba, and they left on November 25th, 1956. They arrived in Cuba in 1956. This boat is a 60-footer. It's powered by twin diesel engines, and they bought it from a Texan for $15,000. And so when they arrived here, they missed their point of intended landing by 15 miles. They had it all figured out. They had a woman with a car that was going to be there and meet them, and she was going to shuttle the revolutionaries back up into the hills, and so that didn't happen. So when they got to the Cuban shore, Batista had been tipped off. He had helicopters out there on patrol. He also had soldiers just crawling all over the area, and so when the boat arrived, I think it ran out of fuel, and the waves washing up on the beach kind of turned the boat sideways, and it went crashing onto the beach, and dumped over on its side and dumped all the 82 people out on the beach. While they were in Mexico, they were joined by Che Guevara, and Che Guevara is quoted as saying, "Hey, that wasn't a landing, that was a shipwreck." And so the name Grandma still lives on. Their newspaper is Grandma. They have a province in eastern Cuba. Over here, it's Grandma. Yeah, and okay, next. Okay, so now we're at the Santiago Airport, and we're getting ready to fly to Havana, which is roughly 500 miles, and so we're approaching this airplane. I don't know if you can see it right there, but this says Antonov 158. So we've got a Russian-built airliner. So I'm looking at this thing. You know, who certifies the airworthiness on it? Who's doing the maintenance on this thing? Who's flying it? I mean, so anyway, so we get on the aircraft and away we go. And I'm digging my fingernails into the seat, wearing out my chewing gum, but guess what? Cubana Airlines did just fine. They got us to Havana right on time. They didn't lose our luggage or anything bad. It was great. So okay, I need a little water. Okay, next. So now we're in Havana, and this is the Sheraton Four Points, and it's in a real nice neighborhood called Miramar, and we stayed there 5 nights, and we made side trips out from Havana. the once again, next I'll show you the swimming pools. Yeah, and then okay, yeah. Next I'll show. There's the other side of it. So I spent a little time in that pool. It was fun. Okay, next I'll even give you a peek of my room there. So anyway, just to point out, hey, we had a nice facility. We really did. Next. Okay, now we're at the Plaza de la Revolucion, and this is a site for large gatherings, and they have rallies and all kinds of commemorative events and anniversaries of different events that happened in Cuba. And anyway, this is Jose Marti again. This statue is 60 feet tall, and the memorial or is I think it's 385 feet high. So it kind of reminded me of our Washington Monument in D.C., but the Washington Monument's a little bigger, 555 feet. But it's kind of the same deal. People can go to the top on an elevator, get a nice view of Havana. There's a museum down here below. And then out beyond this, you can't see it in the photograph, but there's this great big area, and it looks like a parking lot without cars. It's 18 acres, and I mean, it's a site of some really, really big gatherings. 20 years ago, when Pope John Paul II came to Havana, they squeezed 1 million people into this area. And so, I mean, that's half the population of Havana. It's nearly 1/10 the population of Cuba, but that's just how big this thing is. Okay, next. So here's Che Guevara. This building is the Ministry of the Interior building. A lot of people don't know it, but Che was a medical doctor, and of course a fierce fighter, and he was Argentinian. He wasn't Cuban. Che I mean, he's a hero of the Cuban people, and boy, you can buy Che souvenirs all over the place. T-shirts, most of them are red and black, the revolutionary colors. But anyway, Che had, I don't know, he had a few people killed and tortured. That probably wasn't that necessary, so he's no hero of mine. But over next to it, there's a building right over here, just maybe a block away, and there's another figure on this building, and the building is the Ministry of Information and Communications. Okay, let's look at that one. And so a lot of people think this is Castro because it has the word Fidel here, but this person's name is Camilo Cienfuegos, 100 Fires, and Camilo Cienfuegos was he reached the rank of commandante or general in their revolutionary army, and he was a good friend of Che Guevara too. Che named his son Camilo. Yeah. This guy was real popular with the Cuban people, and so probably it's Che Guevara and Fidel and Raul and all. I like this guy the best, and that's exactly what Fidel was thinking. The Cuban people are going to like this guy the best, and he perceived Camilo as a threat, somebody that could wrest away power away from him to run Cuba. So he said, okay, I'm going to have this guy whacked. And next, so here's another picture of Camilo, so the official story was that Camilo was over here in Camagüey, and it's like nighttime, 9 o'clock at night or something, and he needed to get back to Havana. So they had a light plane there that would take him, a twin-engine Cessna 310. And the official story goes that their planned route of flight was take off from Camagüey, go north to the Atlantic Ocean. I don't know why not just go straight, but So go up over the ocean and then follow the coast on over to Havana, probably 2-hour flight max. And so anyway, the airplane never shows up. So Camilo's missing, and they had a elaborate sea and air search for him, and he was a real hero of the Cuban people. So they still have the anniversary of his death is like 1959, the end of October, 1959. People still go down to the ocean and throw flowers in on the day he came up missing. Okay, next. Okay, this is the national capitol, and it was built in the 1920s, cost $17 million. It was paid for by profits from the sugarcane industry. You can see they're doing a little their little restoration on it right now, because if you have a king or a despot or a dictator like Fidel, do you really need a national capital? So this thing fell into disuse. They even renamed it the Ministry of Science building, and so now it's being used more. And Raul Castro is was 86 years old last month. So he said he's going to try to do this one more year. And so in 2018, he's supposed to step down. They have a guy waiting in the wings right now. That's probably going to be the next president. His title right now is First Vice President. His name is Miguel Diaz-Canel. And Canel is the new guy. You don't hear anything about him right now because he's got Raul Castro looking over his shoulder. He can't get too rambunctious. But Canal he's a nice looking man. I've seen his picture on the internet. He's in his 70s. He's a little bit older than Donald Trump, not nearly as old as Raul Castro. So we'll see if Miguel Diaz-Canel is their next guy. Okay, next. Okay, this is old Havana near the harbor, and the reason I took this picture is our Cuban guide Hiroshi told us this was the site or one of the places where Barack Obama visited in 2016 when he came there. So I guess he gave a speech. It's kind of a historical thing. The historical thing about it is Obama was the first president to visit Cuba while in office in 90 years. The last president was Calvin Coolidge in 1926. So I just snapped the picture for that reason. So here we're on a walking tour of Havana, and we looked at the parks and the little shops and all this thing. Okay, Ed, next please. Okay, as you can see, they have nice parks. And next. So here's the daughter Cindy hanging out with the locals. Yeah, which one's Cindy? Okay, next. Okay, next. So that's just some of the scenic things around old Havana. Okay, next. This is an odd piece of artwork. So we got overgrown or oversized poultry being ridden by a nude woman in high heels, and I mean, you've heard of biker chicks. She would be a chick. Okay, next. Okay, so they always have a celebration or some people are always dressing up. Okay, next. Okay, there's two major tourist attractions in Havana, and this is one of them, the Ernest Hemingway Museum, or the Ernest Hemingway Estate, and it's one of the most popular ones. The other one is the Tropicana. Okay, next. Yeah. So here's the Hemingway Estate. Next, a little different angle. So this is quite a place. It really is. Netflix has just come out with a movie recently, and it's called Papa, Hemingway in Cuba. And so I looked at it the other night, and it's interesting. The camera crew came right here to this very spot. I mean, they filmed it right on location. So this thing right here shows up a lot in the movie. Certain rooms in that mansion show up. When we were there, the swimming pool was empty, but they filled it up for this movie. The actors were swimming in the pool. They also did a reproduction of Hemingway's boat and in the movie. Okay, next. This is kind of down on the side there a little bit, but okay, next. When you tour this state, you don't go inside. You walk around the outside, and they leave windows and doors open all over the place. And so it's real nice to get photographs. You just kind of lean inside with your camera and take a picture. So you get really good quality pictures of the. So if they let people go inside and tour it, I mean, this place would have been jam full of people. They'd be in there stealing the ashtrays and everything else. So it's really, I thought, oh, that's a bummer. We go around the outside. It actually turned out better. Go ahead. There's another one. So he sure had a lot of critters on the wall. Okay, next. Okay. Next. Next. Anybody know what that is? It's a piece of artwork. It's called Bull on Marble. And you know who the artist is? Pablo Picasso. And I have no idea what an original Picasso would be worth. I would think a lot. So I was kind of wondering when I looked in the window and took a picture of this thing on Hemingway's wall next. There it is right there. I was just wondering if the real deal's locked in a vault someplace and this is a reproduction that's there, or if that's the actual Pablo Picasso artwork. But we had a lady guide, a docent guide taking us around, but I never got to ask her that. Okay, next. Okay, here's Hemingway's boat. And let me just tell you what. He bought this boat in 1934. It's 38 feet long, paid $7,500 for it. The name on it is Pilar. Pilar is his second wife. Her real name is Pauline. So his first wife was Hadley in 1921. Pauline, he married in 1927. Martha Yellman, who was a war correspondent, he married in 1940. And then his last wife was Mary. Yeah. Okay, next. Okay. When World War II broke out, the German submarines were causing a lot of problems on the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. So the U.S. Navy had this program. They contacted fishermen, pleasure boaters, and they said, okay, we'll give you a radio transceiver, and you kind of keep an eye out for submarines. If you see a German submarine, let us know. And so Hemingway really bought into this. Hey, okay, so he has this radio on there, and he just wants to go head to head with a submarine. He had a Thompson submachine gun on this boat. He got a hold of some grenades. He was ready. I mean, if he would have gone nose to nose with Das boat, he would have been toast. But luckily he didn't. Okay. Back up one more. Yeah, back. Yeah. In 1954, he wanted to take Mary to Africa. I guess to show her where the critters on the wall came from, or something. I don't know. But anyway, so they go to Africa. They go to Kenya and Nairobi, and Hemingway charters this light airplane, a Cessna 180, and he wants to be flown to neighboring Uganda. There's a big tourist attraction there. It's on the Nile River. They call it Murchison Falls. And it's a narrow place, and it's a pretty spectacular waterfall. Also, at the Murchison Falls, they have boats pretty much like this that take the tourists down the Nile where they can look at the falls. So, so away they go to Murchison Falls, and right there on the edge of the Nile near the falls, there was a big 50-foot power pole sticking out. And okay, next. And this bozo hit it. You can see. And so yeah, that's the actual picture of Hemingway's first crash. You can see it's survivable, but anyway, they were pretty messed up. Hemingway had a dislocated shoulder, some internal damage, and Mary had some cracked ribs, and so the tourist boat pulls up there and kind of helps out, and they say, hey, these folks need some serious medical attention. So their plan was, okay, well, down near there's this little airport called let's see, what was it called? Just Butiadba. And at Butiadba Airport, Roger? Well, I think it's got some pretty good dings in it. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, the propellers. So anyway, these people need some medical attention, so you take them to Butiadba Airport, and they're going to fly them to Entebbe for medical treatment. Okay, next. Okay, here's the airplane. They're going to take them to Entebbe. You can see this thing's a real antique. Even in the 1950s, it was an antique. This is a de Havilland DH-89 Dragonfly, and the construction is pretty much wood and fabric, but it's a biplane, twin-engine airplane. So they load Hemingway and Mary into this airplane, and away they go down the runway for takeoff, and they just get liftoff. So he's in the air, low and slow, and the engine catches on fire. Well, yeah, they got an engine fire right on takeoff. So this pilot's a lot more savvy than the last bozo. He knows if he continues straight ahead, he's going to go into the trees at the end of the runway. It's going to all be over. So his only duty then was to get it stopped. So he deliberately smashes this thing back down on the runway. And I mean, it bent it up pretty good, almost like the other one, but at least he got it down and got it stopped before they went into the trees. And so this thing's sitting on the runway. They're trying to get out of it. And so it's a little bit like the last wreck, except this one's on fire. And so so Hemingway literally uses his head. He butts against this fabric covering and breaks a hole in it. And he pulls the fabric apart. And anyway, they got out of the airplane. Everybody survived the crash. But now, in addition to his dislocated shoulder and all the others, they have burns. And Hemingway was kind of messed up. He got a fractured skull, and he had a brain. He had brain damage too. Brain fluid was running out of his ear. Yuck. So he had a concussion, and so they finally got patched up and ended up back in Cuba. This estate where Hemingway lived, they lived there for 20 years, from 1940 to 1960. Okay, yeah, okay, next. So, well, okay, I'll finish the Hemingway story. So now he's back in Cuba, and Fidel takes his house away from him. And so, I mean, that's what he was doing. The Cubans were just nationalizing all foreign property. I mean, industrial things, refineries, factories, mansions like Hemingway lived in. They were just taking it over. So anyway, he got run out of his house, and he had a ranch in Ketchum, Idaho, Sun Valley, and he lost his ability to write, and he was in constant pain after these 2 crashes. So he's belting down pain meds like crazy, and he always was a heavy drinker. That didn't change. So anyway, they're pretty sure now that Hemingway had the same thing that NFL players get that have brain concussions. Remember Junior Seau, that was a linebacker for the Chargers and later the Patriots? I mean, he shot himself. And this thing is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, a word about this long. But so anyway, in July 2nd, 1961, Hemingway shot himself in Ketchum, Idaho, and committed suicide, just like Junior Seau. Okay, this fort, well, first of all, this one over here is the El Moro castle, and the other one. And they built this fort, and then on the other side of the harbor, to protect it, they also built another fort at the same time. The other one was called San Salvador de la Punta, and this one's the Castle of the Three Kings del Moro. And they're on opposite sides. It took them 40 years to build these forts. And so the Spanish are pretty smug. Hey, we've got the harbor protected, and everything's looking good. And but they didn't count on the British. In the 1700s, of course, the British had their 13 colonies up there, and they wanted to expand. They wanted Florida. And so they thought, well, we could invade Florida. We possibly could run the Spanish out of there and take it. But they thought, well, why not capture Havana and occupy that, and then trade them back Havana for Florida? We'll make it. And so that's what the British did. In 1762, they staged this massive land invasion. They came ashore east of this castle, and there was a great big siege. It lasted like a month or so. A big battle there. But all of the defenses of the fort, the cannons and everything, were pointed out to sea, so it was kind of vulnerable on the east side, I guess. So now the Spaniards. Oh, thanks, Jim. You're a hero. So now the Spanish have control of Havana, or the British have control of it. So they go to the Spanish and say, hey, okay, we'll trade you. We'll take Florida. You can have Havana back. And so that's what happened. So the British leave, and the Spanish are there. Wow, what happened there? We're not going to let that happen again. So they built defenses against the land invasion. They built this massive fort, and this is it right here, part of it, and it's called Fort San Carlos de la Cabana, and this fort. Okay, next. Yeah, we can go back. Okay. So this fort is just a huge thing. It's 25 acres. It's the biggest fort that the Spanish built in North America. I mean, it's a self-sustaining city. It's a monster. But you can see there's all kinds of moats and tunnels and drawbridges and turrets and all of this. Well, every night they have a cannon firing ceremony over there. So we had to go check that out. That's a big deal with the tourists too. There's this huge parking lot. It's just packed with tour buses. People flock in there by the hundreds to see this cannon firing thing. we were all there at night. We didn't get any pictures of it at night, so I got this one off the internet. I snitched. Okay, so next. And this is the same thing. This fort. They when they have this cannon firing ceremony, they these soldiers come out there, this gun firing crew, and they're dressed. I would call them colonial uniforms. They're like but they're 18th century uniforms anyway. They march out. They have a sergeant in charge, and he barks out orders real loud in Spanish for the crowd to hear. And they're carrying great big torches for illumination. They have a drummer with them, so they march out. Ba-dum, 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 and so okay, next. So we're going to go to this fort when it gets dark. We have dinner here first. This is Havana Harbor. So the place we had dinner is just right over here. Next. I'm trying to speed this up. We got ways to go. So the sunset on Havana Harbor, so I try to get kind of a sunset picture while we're eating dinner. These two pergolas or arbors are there because they hold weddings there too. Next. Okay, now, so this gun firing crew comes up, and the sergeant's barking out orders, prepare to load the cannon, and so they do. And, okay, load the cannon, and prepare to fire the cannon. Now the drum beat gets faster and faster, and then fire, and next. And they set this thing off. They just fire one shot. I'll go back just one, just a little bit. Yeah. See these uniforms right here, the red and yellow uniforms are uglier than sin. The night we were there, they had nice looking green and white ones. Okay, go ahead again. So we got this. See the can. Okay, go ahead. Okay, this thing is Havana Harbor. I didn't take it because it was scenic. I took it because it was historical. Right out here, just about where this boat is where the battleship Maine was anchored when it blew up in 1898. And so the interesting thing to me was what happened to the Maine after it blew up. And so it kind of laid in this harbor, and it lay there, and then rusty pieces were sticking out of it. It was a hazard to navigation. The Cubans wanted it out of there. The U.S. Navy wanted it out of there. It wasn't a very fitting end for a U.S. warship. So it took a lot of money. So Congress had to set aside funds to do this. And it took them 13 years. But in 1911, a crew came to salvage the hull of the battleship Maine. And so they went out. The first thing they did was build a coffer dam around the wreckage. They dredged up mud, drove in pilings, built a wall completely around it. Then they pumped the water out so they'd have a dry place to work. And one of the devices they used to pump the water out was the pumps right on the Maine, and they worked perfectly. They ran these pumps and they pumped all the water out. Okay, so now here's this hull of this ship. It blew it just about in two pieces. It blew it up pretty good. And incidentally, the Maine blew itself up. I mean, the Spanish didn't sneak over there with a bomb or anything. So they get some steel girders, some stringers, and they kind of weld the hull back together. They sort of put the two pieces together like it needed to be, and then there's a great big crack running down the hull. So how are they going to make that waterproof? They used concrete. They poured cement on it, and they were able to shape it and work it when it was wet. And then that concrete would dry just as hard as a rock, and it would hold the water out. So then they took away the coffer dam. They spread it all back out, and the ship floated. And then they towed it out to the Atlantic Ocean in a spot between Florida and Cuba, and it was real easy to sink it again. They just used a small amount of dynamite, took out some of that concrete, and it sunk like a rock. In 2000, they sent out a diving expedition to look for the main, and they found it. It's there, still there. Okay, next. Okay, this is the this is the Hotel Nacional, and this is the south, or the main entrance here. And we went there. We didn't go there to eat. We didn't stay all night, nothing like that. But this thing has two good stories to tell. So we were just checking out the hotel for its history. And if you go inside here, you go over here, they have a Hall of Fame. They have all the pictures and memorabilia and everything of these movie stars and sports heroes and politicians and millionaire tycoons. And I mean, even Kennedy stayed there before he was president. I have a book at home. It's called Encyclopedia of American Crime. And if you look this thing up, you get 2 pages. So this thing has some really strong ties to U.S. organized crime. And you got to remember, this building was built in 1930 by a U.S. Firm in New York. And in the 1940s and 50s, Havana was Las Vegas. I mean, this is where people came to have fun and gamble. And Las Vegas was just catching on, just sort of starting out. So they, in 1946, they had a gangster convention here. It was the mafia. I mean, there were some really high rollers that came to this thing. Meyer Lansky, Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, Joe Bonanno, Albert Anastasia, and others. And they conducted some business. They kind of split up their territories and agreed to how they would divide their ill-gotten gains. And so then one issue came up. What do we do about Bugsy Siegel? and the Bug went to Las Vegas with the mob money, and he built the Flamingo Hotel. There was some huge cost overrun. The original price of this was supposed to be $1.6 million. Well, it turned out it cost $6 million, but the Bugsy was skimming off a lot of it to sell. So they said, let's whack him. And he was, in 1947, Bugsy was staying with his girlfriend in Beverly Hills, and her living room had great big plate glass windows, and so out of the bushes rises up a shooter. He had an M1 carbine, and he fired a series of shots through that window, got Bugsy, and that was the end of him. If you go out on through this building to the back side, to the north side, it's real nice out there. There's yeah, it's the ocean front. There's the Malecon, the boulevard, okay, we'll look at this just next. So now we're in the courtyard back here, and this hotel, in a way, contributed to the rise of Fulgencio Batista. Batista was a sergeant in the Cuban Army in 1930. There was a nearby military base called Camp Columbia, and on this base, the officer corps, for some reason, it more or less delegated a lot of the responsibility to their sergeants. And the sergeants were pretty much running everything. I mean, it sounds bizarre, but the colonels were reporting to the sergeants, and the inmates were running the institution. And so that went on for a while, from about 1930 to 1933. And then the sergeants got a little disgruntled. Hey, these guys we're doing all their work. They're raking in all the gravy. They're living the country club life, and so they staged a coup, and it was a bloody coup, to get those officer corps out of their army, and so they were running them off this base, and the officers knew that there's safety in numbers. They had to stick together, and so they armed themselves to the teeth. They had Springfield rifles and bandoliers of ammo and sidearms, and they all take off from Camp Columbia, and they come right in here to this new hotel, and the U.S. ambassador to Cuba was Sumner Wells. And he saw what was going on. All these guys going around with guns, and all of a sudden outside here in the courtyard is the enlisted troops, the other ranks, the sergeants, and they came to arrest him more or less. And so Sumner Wells sees all these, all hell's going to break loose here, and he sends a panic-stricken telegram to the new Secretary of State under Franklin Roosevelt, and that was Cordell Hull, and he tells Mr. Hull, hey, send troops. I mean, something's bad's gonna, and Cordell Hull wouldn't send troops, but I guess he told him, be careful. And so pretty soon these officers started taking defensive positions up here in these windows, and the enlisted guys were down here at the front and back, and the first shot was fired from down here. So pretty soon they had a battle that lasted 11 hours, and I mean it was a real bloody thing. You think the Moncada barracks was shot up? This thing suffered major damage. They had a real rip-roaring gunfight going, but and the only thing that stopped it was these officers that were holed up inside, and they were all expert shots. They spent a lot of time on the rifle range. They could all shoot expert, and but they ran out of ammo. So then they capitulated. They came down, and most of them were killed right on the spot. These enlisted guys down below were, I mean, they saw their buddies dropping dead on each side of them, and their adrenaline's pumping, and they want revenge, and so they killed a lot of them. It was kind of a mess. So Batista then this enabled him to get power. He became the Ministry of Military Affairs, and Chief of the Armed Forces with the rank of Colonel. Next. So here he is. Here's the guy. So then Batista went on from as the Chief of the Armed Forces from 1933 to 1940. Then he got elected to President of Cuba in 1940. It was a 4-year term, 40 to 44. And when Batista was president on this first term, he was an effective president. He improved the economy, public works, civil service, education, organized labor, and then he moved to Florida from 44 to 52, and here he got tangled up with the mobsters, and they said, hey, why don't you go back to Cuba again? You can be president one more time, and we'll make you rich. We'll get in there, all this gambling and everything that's going on, prostitution and all that. So he got tangled up with the mob, and he got greedy. So anyway, when Batista returned to Cuba, it was like Jekyll and Hyde. I mean, he became a brutal, corrupt dictator. And when Castro finally overthrew Batista in January 1st, 1959, Batista left with $400 million, Yeah, I mean, he must have had a lot of help carrying his luggage out to the aircraft with him because, yeah, he just stripped, he got every bit of wealth he could get his clammy little hands on. And he died in Portugal in 1973. Okay, next. Cuba has the best cigars, without a doubt, in the world. They also produce the best rum in the world, and they make pretty good coffee too. So we went to Pinar del Rio, which is over here. This is the tobacco capital of the world. Next, and here's a tobacco drying shed. It's this rich red soil that does it. And boy, the tobacco just thrives there. They've taken these tobacco seeds and tried to grow them elsewhere, like Jamaica and places, and they're not as good. And the same thing, they tried mechanized farming, their tractors and so forth, and that didn't work as well either. These tobacco seeds have to be planted and tended and harvested by hand. Okay, next. Okay, this is just a drying shed there. Okay, next. This was just washing on the line, but it looked colorful. So, next. Okay, this nearby is the Vinales Valley. This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. I'll just read to you what that is for a second. Somewhere I had it right here. It's the UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization. There's 900 of these in the world. Actually, a few more than that. And they add a new one once in a while. But the sites are selected for natural beauty, human creative genius, cultural importance, historical significance, and for example, the Taj Mahal is one. The pyramids in Egypt are another UNESCO site. In the U.S., the Statue of Liberty. We have Mesa Verde in Colorado is one. Yellowstone is one. The U.S. has 21 of these. Cuba has 9. And this is one of them. It's just some of the most scenic scenery in Cuba. Okay, next. Another one of Vinales Valley. Okay, next. Okay, we also visited a cigar factory in Havana, and it's really strange. You see, even the women working there, everybody's puffing on a cigar. I think they get 5 for their own personal use every day. And also, these people that roll these cigars, that takes real talent too. They go to school, they serve a long apprenticeship to do this, and they're kind of socially up the ladder a little bit. And they make a little more money than some of the other Cubans. So, okay, next. This is probably one of the funnest things we did. Funnest, is that a word? It should be. But so Cindy and I are riding in a 1954 Chevy Bel Air convertible along with Marty and Doug there. Well, Brian chartered 6 of these 1950s convertibles, and I'll tell you where our destination is in a minute. But they're okay. Next. There's the 2 Jeepsters. Okay, next. Okay, so it's at nighttime. We're driving down the Malecon Boulevard, and we're waving at each other and having a good time. And I think every one of these old convertibles had a Model A Ford Ooga horn in it. And so we're going down there, ooga, 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 and so where are we going? Okay, next. Okay, the Tropicana. Yeah. Okay, next. So you can see this thing's been in operation since 1939, and this is where Lucy met Desi, and it's been copied in Europe and Las Vegas, and I mean this place is just amazing. It just blows your socks off. Okay, next. These costumes are so elaborate. They have about 200 cast members and singers and dancers. Water time. We're nearly done here. Well, okay, next. I mean, just look at that. I mean, we're all mesmerized with these costumes and these voluptuous performers. I mean, it's just. I mean, just look at this headgear. Carmen Miranda, eat your heart out. Okay, next. Next. Okay, next. Okay, next. Okay, now we're in Cienfuegos, and oh yeah, we gotta do Cienfuegos here, which is right here. Means 100 fires, and this city's a little bit newer than some of the others, so the architecture is a little bit different. Okay, next. This is just kind of a scenic place where we had lunch. There's a restaurant right beside the boat docks. Next. This place is something else. This thing it's Moorish architecture, and it's just an architectural jewel. It was built in 1917 as a private residence by this wealthy business tycoon. His name was Don Isidro de Valle Blanco, and it was his private residence. After he died, his wife moved to Spain, and in the 1950s, the gangsters even had their eye on this. They were going to convert it into a casino. This would have made a great casino. So now it's a high-end restaurant. We went there not to eat in their restaurant. They have a kind of a lounge area and a bar up on the roof, and with a real scenic view. Next, so you can just see how ornate that is inside. It's just something you don't expect. Okay, next. And here's the top on the roof. So we all kind of sat up here for a while, had a couple libations, enjoyed the scenery. Okay, next. Okay, this is the Bay of Pigs. This is Bahia de Conchino, or the Playa Huron. Okay, next. So they have a museum, and okay, next. There's a Russian T-34 tank. Next. I'd tell you a little bit about these airplanes, but we're running out of time here. So, okay, next. Here we are now at the 500-year-old Trinidad, population 75,000. It's an architectural showplace. It's got cobblestone streets, and this hotel that we stayed in, it's kind of small. It's maybe 40, 50 rooms, but it's top of the line. It's really nice. I'll show you my room next. Okay, next. Okay, we had dinner one night at a rooftop paladar, and it just looks so scenic up there. I just couldn't resist taking a picture. Next. Okay, now we're on the beach. This is the Playa Ancon beach near Trinidad. So we spent some time there. It was really not going next. Just check out this blue Caribbean water, white sandy beaches. It's great. Next. So we were at a pottery shop one day. Got to do that, buy souvenirs there. Next. This is the Mirador de Loma del Puerto. It's a 600-foot high overlook over the valley of the sugar mills, or the Los Ingeos. It's also a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Notice they have a zip line across there. Nobody used it while we were there. I was waiting for somebody. Okay, next. So this is all sugar mill country here. This is a 150-foot bell tower. It was constructed in 1816 to call in the slaves. It's called the Manaka Isnaga Tower. And there's the whole area is just littered with ruins of sugar mills. They're all over the place there. They have a tourist steam train that runs from Trinidad up here to this state. Okay, next. So this is the view from the top of that 150-foot tower. This place is now a restaurant and a little museum. And if you look over here, it looks like people are hanging out there washing, but they're not. Those are the vendors selling their souvenirs. They have tablecloths, beach bags, shirts, just all kinds of things you can buy there. This actually, we had our last lunch together in Cuba. Okay, next. Okay, now we're coming to Santa Clara. This is Che Guevara's town. I mean, he fought a battle here that ended the revolution, and so Che and his troops captured Santa Clara, and so in Havana they said, we're not going to let that happen. We're going to send down an armored train, and it had 385 troops on this armored train, and so how do you stop an armored train? You take away the tracks. And that's just what Che Guevara did. So he got this bulldozer and they plowed up 150 feet of track. Okay, next. So these cars jumped the tracks and they just left them lay. Where they just built a park around them. They put some artwork here, and so this is the armored train. Then after it jumped the tracks, they attacked it with Molotov cocktail. They were throwing gasoline bombs at it. Okay, next. Okay, so this is Che Guevara's. It's a monument to Che. This is a 20-foot bronze statue. There's a concrete wall over here with all kinds of artwork on it that pays tribute to Che, tells what his accomplishments were, and so forth. So there's 4 blocks of concrete here, and so Che's remains are buried here along with some other revolutionary at Santa Clara. Okay, next. Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, we're done. Cindy, you got anything?